The Saucer's Nest, a short story. The slow-paced sunshine of the wheat towns on the long highway west can turn men to strange invention. The morning that I drove out to Colin and Darcy's on the back road was the morning that their intricate designs finally came unstitched. Only Colin was home when I arrived. There was an array of his reconditioned lawn mowers out the front. I was thinking to purchase a wide trade four-stroke, if you had a good one. There was also the matter that Colin, Darcy too to a lesser extent, was a very keen and long-term supporter of my own football team, the Wombatook Goannas, and the Goannas had won the preliminary final and were in the playoff next week. There was much to discuss. But just then, Darcy arrived home, and he said to Colin, "Well, Colin, mate, the jig is up." Darcy was English. He had a Pommy accent. He was overweight and jolly. The jig, it quickly emerged, was in the form of an investigative reporter named Alex Quigley from the National Times. "Quigley's onto us," said Darcy. "It's all over, mate." Exactly what was all over wasn't clear to me, and for a moment the two men were talking in rural riddles. Neither of them were alarmed at this turn of fortune, though, Quigley from the National Times, but were rather resigned or relieved or even amused. Colin and Darcy, bachelors both, had teamed up in a mower business years before and lived in a run-down house on the back road where, as I say, the sunshine was slow-paced and the vast wheat fields, green or gold with triticale, extend as far as Strange Invention. Colin was an ex-army man. They say he had a lady friend once, but it ended badly, and he turned to lawnmowers. "You better come and see this," said Colin to me, understanding my curious confusion. If the jig was up, there was no reason not to show me just what jig had been upped. Despite this invitation, I ventured anyway that the Goannas had played well, but next week was the test, and it was high time the Goannas won a flag. To which Colin agreed, adding his usual complaint about the umpires. What it was I had better come and see, the jig that was upped, with Darcy following along, was the shed. It was behind the house. It was in better condition than the house. Corrugated tin, a sloping red roof, a water tank. One would think that it is a utility where, for example, the two men stored spare mower parts. As we stepped inside, though, what unfolded took me backwards. There was a table bedecked with large sheets of paper with elaborate geometrical designs. There were similar designs displayed on the wall, and also on the wall, one wall near the door, was a pinboard full of newspaper cuttings. There were some odd instruments here and there. I was expecting mower parts. This was a studio for some as yet unfathomable purpose. "What's all this?" I asked, looking around. Darcy put it as succinctly as any man. "Colin and I have a bit of a hobby," he said. "There's not much to do out here." Then he explained the exact situation to Colin. "Quigley's driving up from the city. He'll be here this afternoon. He'll want an interview." "How much does he know?" asked Colin. "Enough," said the Pom. Quigley had picked up a thread, and being investigative, he pursued it. Over the next however long, the two men, principally Colin, explained to me this hobby. It was, I should say, a confession, and even before Quigley arrived, numerous strange inventions fell into place. I had lived in the district only a dozen years myself. Before my time, in a few nearby locations, there had been events that drew outside attention. In 1992, at the outset, at harvest time, large, mysterious, preternatural indentations, crop circles, if you will, had emerged in wheat fields to the south, It was notable because prior to that time, beginning in about 1972, the appearance of these cosmic stamps had been confined to parts of rural England and then, as if by contagion, parts of France and the continent. This was the background Alex Quigley had assembled. Being investigative, he drew a timeline. His initial investigation, though, was not into the crop circles, but into the source's nest. In early 1993, a waft of locals started seeing sources, and these sightings accumulated in the wetlands where the river twists near the silos on the road to Narbonne, which became known as the source's nest. Apparently there are places where you can do a PhD on crop circles. A crop circlist is called a serologist, and they study circles in all seriousness. One such, with a PhD in it, was Gunther Lothen from Finland, who arrived in the district and studied the evidence. He concluded with excitement that it was not humanly possible to have made such perspicuous impressions with no sign of footprints or equipment or any comings or goings. Therefore, ipso logico, aliens. Or you can do a diploma in community development and call yourself a ufologist, which was the case with Neville Skinner, who arrived to investigate the source's nest near Narbonne. He was a man who had read way too much science fiction and thought it made him an intellectual. As he reported, this was in September 1995, sightings had been advanced by a good cross-section of the locals: farmers, truck drivers, firemen, road workers, surveyors, school teachers, policemen, hairdressers. That in itself made the sightings compelling. Not all witnesses reported sources though. Some reported cigars, some pancakes, some a huge floating soap bubble, and one, the hairdresser, swore what she saw looked for all the world like a quince pudding, as best she could describe it. Again, this was all background for Alex Quigley. It was also the stuff and substance of the newspaper cuttings pinned to the pinboard near the door of the shed. There were also, I noticed, some choice cuttings about the goannas, a record of the ups and downs of several seasons, but mainly all the matter concerned the district's extraterrestrial reputation. It had fizzed out after a while, and the sightings stopped until stirred up by new crop circles here and there. By the time I arrived in the area, it was all a matter of a loose smile, as people would say. You know, they call that swampy bit near the silos on the road to Narbonne the source's nest, and you say, go on. Nevertheless, it is widely counted as a genuine case, at least a phenomenon, by the otherworldly academics who pretend to know. The heyday was in the 1990s. The ufologist explained the lull in activity since then as the aliens being shy of too much public attention. Meanwhile, I am looking at Colin and Darcy's designs and equipment. Darcy, sitting down, says, I knew a fellow back home in England, Hertfordshire, Billy Foster, and he made crop circles. This was back in 1975. It started as a protest about land tax. It's easy enough. Billy showed me. You just need a board and a piece of string. Never in my mind had I made a connection between Colin, Darcy, circles and sources. But there it was in the shed, and both of them were happy to reveal it, now the jig was up. But how do you make the circle without leaving any paths to or fro, I wondered. That was the one thing about crop circles that had ever made me a puzzled observer. I told you, said Darcy, a board and a piece of string. We've improved on the board a bit over the years, said Colin. They had been industrious over the years. They started with simple circles, which then became larger and more elaborate with spirographic designs. Colin was the design man. On one of the side tables there were some mower parts, and Colin walked over and picked up an old piston. Look at this, he says. He shows me how, in the worn metal, and the lathing. Old pistons can display nice patterns at the end of their tube. This was the source of cosmic inspiration. He would then transcribe it with a compass and enlarge it onto a sheet of butcher's paper. Darcy was the man who knew the technique and could render the design into flattened grass. They would, when the cosmos called, drive a few hundred miles clear of home and impose patterns in the fields of farmers who would merely scratch their heads. We didn't do the sources though, Colin was quick to add. There were several explanations therefore. The one favoured by ufologists and people with PhDs in crop circles was that even if Colin and Darcy had rendered the design into flattened grass, the aliens passing by must have seen them, thought the locals friendly and set up a source's nest nearby. This was the only rational account. An alternative theory was that the locals had all been seeing things, probably weather balloons. Advocates at the time had made much of the testimony of a policeman, Sergeant Kilkenny, who claimed he saw a saucer and his police car was caught briefly in a tractor beam. The two circle designers were dismissive, however. Firstly, said Darcy, he was drunk as a skunk, and secondly, he needed an alibi for his rendezvous with Leanne, Tom Carter's wife. But you're not allowed to say that, Colin complained, jumping in. Similarly, a truck driver, Gappy Thompson, had pleaded saucers when he was caught doing twice the speed limit. He was carrying a big load of marijuana down from Queensland, said Darcy. But you're not allowed to say that, Colin complained again. Lest there be any misunderstanding, Darcy wanted to add, I haven't got anything against saucers, but I don't have any time for people who claim to see them. That struck me as a robust compromise. Well, I said, gazing around again, you blokes have certainly been busy. There's not much to do out here, Darcy said once more. Somehow, Quigley from the National Times had worked it out. He'd made the connection back to England. There had to be some reason the aliens moved from Hertfordshire to New South Wales, other than the wide wheat fields being an alien visitation waiting to happen. He would arrive in the afternoon, driving up from the city. Quigley and Darcy, who had spoken to him by phone, knew he had done his homework. The jig was definitely up. But other than trespass and public nuisance, what had the two mower dealers ever done? I was impressed. I knew they could be creative with second-hand mower parts, but I never suspected strange invention. Darcy pointed out that people back home in England, in Hertfordshire, had been scratching incongruous pictures of horses or giants with big dicks in the vegetation since Neolithic times. It was a big spiralling circle gleaned from a piston shaft imposed upon a paddock down near Gunalong West, of which they were most proud. It was photographed. There was a story in the Australian Geographic. The farmer had to take out a restraining order to stop the stream of circle enthusiasts trudging across his crops. There were two chairs under the veranda of the shed outside the door. This is where the two men would sit and their strange inventions dawn in the drawn-out, dreary days of slow sunshine. They pulled over a third chair for me. We sat there, waiting for Quigley. As it happened, they did have a wide trade four-stroke in good condition for only $200. After a long session of considering the jig that was up in silence, I said to Colin sitting beside me, I don't know that the goannas have got the forward line. I know, he said. They don't have any goal kickers. Darcy agreed. Being a Pom, he grew up on soccer, but he had acquired a taste for the local code. We lamented that teams had become too defensive, and the game these days had degenerated into a skirmish.